Howdy. Hope you're doing well. Good November 2022 and wherever you are in the future. But, interesting thing from Galileo, from Discoveries and Opinions of Galileo, and from Galileo's little book, The Assayer. I'll put a link to it in the show description, of course, and links to some other stuff. But here's a little story he wrote to illustrate a point. Interesting. And one thing that shows how Galileo was well-rounded, had kind of range. He was like a kind of like a Renaissance man. He had range, as David Epstein would put it. Specialized generalist, good at math, good at physics, good at astronomy. Didn't just dabble in them, did cutting edge work. Specialized generalist. Knew music. Could write, as you've seen in some of the things I've read before, and in some of this. And one thing was it translation of Galileo, I forget, but I think it was one thing I read earlier in a previous video. I don't know what it was like in the Italian, but at least in the translation there was a lot of alliteration. And in one thing I read, and in here, he's got some good ways of phrasing things, like when he talks about eagles and starlings. I don't remember exactly where that is in here. I'm not going to look it up right now. In the Assayer somewhere. Maybe I'll put a link to that if I remember. But here, it's a little thing I read, and I'll put a link to it again so you can read it on your own, study it. There's some interesting lessons from this, besides the fact that Galileo could write well. But I'll read it first, and you can think about it. So it's a few pages, like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, like a few paragraphs on each page. Clearly they're not too big. But he's in the Assayer. I think here he's talking about doing something in regard to someone putting him to task for knowing where comments come from. But here, quote, "Long experience has taught me this about the status of mankind with regard to matters requiring thought. The less people know and understand about them, the more positively they attempt to argue concerning them. While on the other hand, to know and understand a multitude of things renders men cautious in passing judgment upon anything new," unquote. Amen. And some of that is known in modern parlance is the Dunning-Kruger effect, I think it's called. I better get something here and make some notes so I don't forget reading this stuff and talking and having other things on one's mind. I don't remember all the stuff I think I might want to link to. And eagles, starlings. But that's true, as we find today, as you know from experience, from history. When people don't know much about something, they tend to, some people, will run their mouth about it a lot. But there's different factors for that. Some people say it's human nature. No, because human nature involves free will. We're self-sovereign social animals. So we're embedded in a society, and we make choices. Part of this depends on the influences on us, our culture, our education, things like that. It's not just human nature making us do it. It's people in a context, what they've learned, what they stand up for, how they're trained conceptually, trained socially, and all this. A lot going on with it. It's complicated and complex. But we do see some of that. The more people know and understand, the less people know and understand, the more they run their mouth, making hot air and no cognitive content. And right, and it's interesting here that he says, know and understand a multitude of things instead of know and understand some particular thing. So cool. Now, start again. Quote, long experience has taught me this about the status of mankind with regard to matters requiring thought. The less people know and understand about them, the more positively they attempt to argue concerning them. While on the other hand, to know and understand a multitude of things renders men cautious in passing judgment upon anything new. Once upon a time, in a very lonely place, there lived a man endowed by nature with extraordinary curiosity and a very penetrating mind. For a pastime, he raised birds, whose songs he much enjoyed, and he observed with great admiration the happy contrivance by which they could transform at will the very air they breathed into a variety of sweet songs. Unquote. That is nice. That is beautifully put. Plus the curiosity, yeah. It's like, in some ways it reminds me of, I read that and I think, Bernd Heinrich, the great biologist. Someone with curiosity and a penetrating mind, focused on the world. Amen. Or reminds me of a title of an article I saw, something like, what is it right here, about Richard Feynman, something I'll have to look at, read, and talk about later. Title, Richard Feynman, the man who only used his intellect to enjoy life. Amen. But, so, quote, one night, this man chanced to hear a delicate song close to his house, and being unable to connect it with anything but some small bird, he set out to capture it. When he arrived at a road, he found a shepherd boy who was blowing into a kind of hollow stick while moving his fingers about on the wood, thus drawing from it a variety of notes similar to those of a bird, though by quite a different method. Puzzled, but impelled by his natural curiosity, he gave the boy a calf in exchange for this flute and returned to solitude. But realizing that if he had not chanced to meet the boy, he would never have learned of the existence of a new method of forming musical notes and the sweetest songs, he decided to travel to distant places in the hope of meeting with some new adventure. The very next day, he happened to pass by a small hut. He happened to pass by a small hut within which he heard similar tones. And in order to see whether this was a flute or a bird, he went inside. There he found a small boy who was holding a bow in his right hand and sawing upon some fibers stretched over a hollowed piece of wood. The left hand supported the instrument, and the fingers of the boy were moving so that he drew from this a variety of notes, and most melodious ones too, without any blowing. Now you who participate in this man's thoughts and share his curiosity may judge of his astonishment. Yet finding himself now to have two unanticipated ways of producing notes and melodies, he began to perceive that still others might exist. His amazement was increased when, upon entering a temple, he heard a sound, and upon looking behind the gates, discovered that this had come from the hinges and fastenings as he opened it. Another time, led by curiosity, he entered an inn, expecting to see someone lightly bowing the strings of a violin, and instead he saw a man rubbing with his fingertip around the rim of a goblet and drawing forth a pleasant tone from that. Then he observed that wasps, mosquitoes, and flies do not form single notes by breathing, as did the birds, but produce their steady sounds by swift beating of their wings. And as his wonder grew, his conviction proportionately diminished that he knew how sounds were produced. Nor would all his previous experiences have sufficed to teach him, or even allow him to believe that crickets derive their sweet and sonorous shrilling by scraping their wings together, particularly as they cannot fly at all. Well, after this man had come to believe that no more ways of forming tones could possibly exist, after having observed, in addition to all the things already mentioned, a variety of organs, trumpets, fifes, stringed instruments, and even that little tongue of iron, which is placed between the teeth, which makes strange use of the oral cavity for sounding box and of the breath for vehicle of sound, when, I say, this man believed he had seen everything, he suddenly found himself once more plunged deeper into ignorance and bafflement than ever. For having captured in his hands a cicada, he failed to diminish, unquote, and by the way, some people pronounce it cicada as if they're tripping. I like cicada as if I'm flowing cicada. Other people are cicada as if they're tripping. But, people pronounce it differently. More later. Okay. He held in his hands a cicada. He failed to diminish its strident noise. Let me see. Move this over a little bit. He failed to diminish its strident noise either by closing its mouth or stopping its wings. Yet he could not see it move the scales that covered its body, or any other thing. At last he lifted up the armor of its chest, and there he saw some thin, hard ligaments beneath. Thinking the sound might come from their vibrations, he decided to break them in order to silence it. But nothing happened until his needle drove too deep. And transfixing the creature, he took away its life with its voice, so that he was still unable to determine whether the song had originated in those ligaments. And by this experience, his knowledge was reduced to diffidence, so that when asked how sounds were created, he used to answer tolerantly that although he knew a few ways, he was sure that many more existed which were not only unknown but unimaginable. I could illustrate with many more examples nature's bounty in producing her effects, as she employs means we could never think of without our senses and our experiences to teach them to us. Unquote. Repeat that. I could illustrate with many more examples nature's bounty in producing her effects, as she employs means we could never think of without our senses and our experiences to teach them to us. And sometimes even these are insufficient to remedy our lack of understanding. So I should not be condemned for being unable to determine precisely the way in which comments are produced, especially in view of the fact that I have never boasted that I could do this, knowing that they may originate in some manner that is far beyond our power of imagination. The difficulty of comprehending how the cicada forms its song, even when we have it singing to us right in our hands, ought to be more than enough to excuse us for not knowing how comments are formed at such immense distances. Let us therefore go no further than our original intention, which was to set forth the questions that appeared to upset the old theories and to propose a few new ideas. Unquote. Amen. Good stuff in there. That shows how really, truly scientific people think. The curiosity driving them to learn things and to stick to the evidence of the senses. Some of this stuff I love. It is awesome. It is beautifully written. And implicitly here, we have ideas about how science should work and a censure of Platonic methods. Notice we look at nature and the evidence of the senses. We don't make crap up and try to prove them. This idea that science is about making up hypotheses and trying to disprove them is a bunch of nonsense. That's comes from Plato and Kant and is a counterfeit, fake, useless view of science and scientific method. Clearly, we use experimentation. Clearly, we make up hypotheses. But that idea is a total it's a misrepresentation of the facts and a bad philosophy. Just because someone uses, someone can have a lie where they're identifying some people and saying some things that are true, but the whole thing weaved together is still a lie. The totality. Science is about forming concepts, finding cause-effect relationships, and a lot goes into that. But it's got to be, we can do things that we don't even understand yet, like somehow or other, we have this whole unified consciousness, and it can give us information in a dream, an imagination, in something, but something is irrelevant and it doesn't become science until it's brought into scientific methods and scientific thinking in a solid, real context. Same thing with hypotheses. We can prove them true, and some aren't. And theories, otherwise the idea is that all science is a bunch of things that have been proven false or will be proven false, and that's a bunch of nonsense. Because we don't do the stuff we have with modern technology or the stuff people did a long time ago with limited technology by stuff that has been proven false or will be proven false. It's only based on, obviously, on seeing what's true. But the stuff we do with, some bad philosophers get carried away with, and that some too many scientists accept without knowing, if they look what they actually do versus what some bad philosophers say, they'd have a better idea what's really going on. Some of the hypotheses are made up and developed in order to try to form concepts and get explanations and get cause-effect relationships. That's the process that's going on. It's not hypothesis, airy-fairy. But as he says here, quote, she employs means we could never think of without our senses and our experiences to teach them to us, unquote. Amen. And nowadays, the cicada, it's known how it makes its sound. I could put a link to that in the description field. And close this browser. Open this one. I'll see if I can find a good video, but there's some information here. But then, just like potato, people have on dictionary.com, here's
cicada,
potato,
cicada,
patata, potato, patata, tomato, whatever. And in Cambridge, dictionary.cambridge.org, in the UK they say
cicada.
In the US they say
cicada.
Sue, cicada to me. But it's not how they make music nowadays, and it's not how people make sound. Galileo didn't know. And it's good not saying I don't know here. That's something else we talked about. When you don't know, say I don't know. We got to look at a variety of things to see how something is created. We got to look for what the Greeks called the one and the many. That's part of science that traces way back to the Greeks. And I don't know where else, but Thales, even though he said all is water, and he was wrong in that respect, he was still right in looking for, the first time that I'm aware of, in recorded history at least, looking for the one thing that made up everything. Starting to get science established. Because once you did that, then people could start getting knowledge and science done right. Then it took method. We got to know to look at reality. And a lot of us learn that you got to look at what a lie is versus what truth is, and we got to learn that as a basic thing, we got to be talking about something. There's to be something concrete backing up what we say, and that's a basic aspect of logic. But few learn much beyond that about method and how the processing that works in our minds. concept formation, induction, all that. It's like even a lot of like science stuff, where the way a lot of people are taught, it's like there's stuff you learn, and there's some black box, just mysterious processing. Almost, I don't know if any philosophers that have discussed what concepts are, induction, except for like John Locke and Ayn Rand. I'm only aware of those two in my limited awareness who have said anything about it. Otherwise, it's just some like black box that don't even comment about, even though it's like super important to forming judgments, being wise, knowing what the truth is. But here, in Galileo's little story here, good lessons about saying I don't know when we don't, about sticking to the evidence of the senses, and then with the examples he gave and more, people were able to figure out that sound is based on a disturbance in a medium. I can put a link to that too. It's like a wave in some medium, like the sound we usually hear is a wave in air. A compression and retraction. Like here in Introductory Physics by Dr. Herbert Priestley, he's got a nice diagram of sound and the compression. If I can find it, there's one there I just saw for that, or maybe it wasn't in here. Maybe it's just something I'm used to kind of drawing on my own. Right here, but then you can see it with this pitchfork. And you got, hopefully that's coming in okay. Compressed air, rarefied air, compressed air. So it's compressed more than usual. There's less there than usual, less dense, less stuff, more than usual, because this is pushing forward and compressing it and goes back, and then it's not as compressed. But so we know some things like that. Galileo started doing some basic research in sound and sound waves, looking at, I think he did stuff with sand on a plate. He did some of that. Looked at some of the patterns it made. I think I've read about that in here. I don't remember where else that's come up. But he did a little bit of study of sound, but then more of that was done later to see how sound is made and how cicadas make their sound. But he's good in maintaining that perspective of I don't know until we know, whether it's with comets or sound. But nice little story here. I recommend reading over, thinking about. Got some good lessons in it, as I say. Like, again, first paragraph, quote, "Long experience has taught me this about the status of mankind with regard to matters requiring thought. The less people know and understand about them, the more positively they attempt to argue concerning them. While on the other hand, to know and understand a multitude of things renders men cautious in passing judgment upon anything new." Unquote. And I like this other paragraph about this person. Beautiful. Quote, "Once upon a time, in a very lonely place, there lived a man endowed by nature with extraordinary curiosity and a very penetrating mind. For a pastime, he raised birds, whose songs he much enjoyed, and he observed with great admiration the happy contrivance by which they could transform at will the very air they breathed into a variety of sweet songs." Unquote. That's what the real scientific people do. They're driven by curiosity and an interest in things, and not just a degree. What's going to be what someone really scientific says? Not that I have a degree. I'm part of the club. No. That's like a real scientist is not going to talk about that. They're going to talk about how they're curious, how they have an interest in something. That's what would drive them. Some people get a degree to fake being a scientist. Some people have an interest in something, and so they get a degree to help them learn more and to make connections to develop that interest. That is what's coming up in there. A love for nature, just like I said about Richard Feynman earlier, or Marie Curie. She didn't get her hands dirty and like concentrate radioactive stuff like because of anything other than a love for what she was doing, you know. And she even said it. Something else I talked about with some quotes from her. Kind of like Newton said, he felt like a child on the beach, you know, enjoying what he was doing, being immersed in the beauty of nature and wanting to discover things, being curious. She had quotes like that. But interesting there, food for thought, something to read over. Peace.